1998 was the year of the hard-hitting FPS games: Half-Life, Sin, Thief the Dark Project, and of course Unreal. Developed by Epic MegaGames, who would later on to create the Gears of War franchise, Unreal is one of those games that really deserves its place amongst the undisputed kings of the genre. So, assuming you know nothing about this game, allow me to reiterate. In the game's opening, you're the only survivor of a prison ship that's crash-landed on an alien planet named Narpali. You soon learn the planet has been taken over by an alien race known as the Scarge, and you begin a long journey as you traverse the planet to find and kill the Scarge Queen. Now when I say long, I mean long. Unreal will probably take you at the very least 8 to 12 or so hours to get through on a first playthrough, and that's without delving into the game's expansion or playing around with the bot match mode. The level design isn't too complex, but it does revolve around flipping switches and backtracking to previously locked areas. A lot of these switches are often timed, meaning you have to make it back to a certain area within a time limit. This can make for some confusing level design, but ultimately, if you're paying attention to your surroundings, it shouldn't give you too much grief. Every time you flip a switch or activate something, you get a little pop-up message in-game on something called a translator, which generally tells you what your next objective is. Now, people who just rush around flipping switches at random without reading about what the hell they're doing are going to find themselves stuck real quick. This game heralded the release of the Unreal Engine, which was up there with the Quake engine in terms of bragging rights for PC owners at the time. It does look a little bit dated nowadays, with some really basic geometry here and there and some laughable character models, but it still offers up some truly huge levels for the player to explore, with lots of little secrets and nooks and crannies with hidden goodies. This game, along with something like Quake, is a real testament to the complexity seldom seen in shooting games anymore, and rarely does a level just consist of moving in a single direction. There's a great variety between levels as well. You start off in a bunch of villages before you move through a mine, then a spaceship, another village type area before a castle that leads you to the finale inside the alien mothership. You'll often have to use items like torches and flares to light up darkened areas, and can also use one-off protective items in heavy gunfights to keep yourself safe from harm. It's also got a kick-ass soundtrack composed by, among other people, Alexander Brandon, who would later go on to compose for other classic games such as Deus Ex and the other games in the Unreal series. Of course, you can't talk about Unreal without talking about its awesome weapon lineup, something that is still unique even among other games of its time. You start off with something called a dispersion pistol, which is a weak energy-based weapon that you can upgrade over time. Then you get your hand on an actual pistol before a crystal-firing machine gun, rocket launcher, eventually getting your hands on the game's bigger and harder-hitting weaponry. My favourite of these is the flak cannon, which is basically the game's version of a shotgun. When you're in nice and close and let rip with this bad boy against a weakened enemy, it pretty much turns them into mincemeat, and it's extremely satisfying. Another good weapon is the Razor Jack, which launches large spinning blades capable of taking an enemy's head clean off with a well-placed shot, and the Bio Rifle, which fires out thick globs of toxic goo that can melt enemies within a few hits. Part of the testament to how well these weapons are designed can be seen in the fact that they were pretty much recycled across every single game in the Unreal series. As they say, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. Overall, these are some truly great guns to use and show off the creativity that was really dominant in shooting games back then. With the exception of a few weapons, all of these are projectile-based, meaning that there is something of a delay between when you fire the weapon and when it hits its intended target. You often have to lead your shot and keep in mind the way enemies are moving and plan ahead. Now, this automatically gives the shooting loads of depth, as you'll have to choose which weapon works best in each encounter. I mean, a rocket launcher is great and all that, but good luck using it against some of the game's faster enemies, who are really good at dodging all manner of incoming attacks. On that note, one of Unreal's biggest strengths is the enemy AI, something that's still impressive by today's standards, in fact, especially by today's standards. Enemies will hop all over the place, rolling to the side to avoid your incoming rockets and projectiles, whilst attacking you ferociously. In a lot of ways, it feels more like you're playing against another person than a computer, because the way they move is very similar to the way most people maneuver during a deathmatch game. They're also able to wield the same weapons as the players, so expect them to be firing rocket launchers and bio rifles as well. And they throw this at you pretty much from the get-go. The very first enemy you encounter is a bullet sponge type that is something of a rapid-fire rocket launcher for each arm. Talk about a trial by fire. Generally, if you keep an enemy at a distance, you should be fine. Most enemy projectiles can be avoided if you've got the reflexes and coordination. and once you learn which weapons to use against which opponent, the game becomes a lot easier. Aside from hostiles, you can also run across the native inhabitants of Narpali known as the Gnarly. These are cool looking shaman type guys that often get chased down by the Scourge and brutally killed if you're not quick enough to save them. Even now, I feel really remorseful if I see these guys getting killed, mainly because I feel sorry for them, but also because if you can protect them, they will often assist you by opening secret areas and giving you access to much needed items. So at this point you're thinking, okay dickhead, what's wrong with this game? Well, to be honest, there's really not that much wrong with it at all. By that I mean there's not anything objectively wrong with this game. Anything I complain about is really just nitpicking. I guess the biggest issue that might turn off most newcomers though is the level design. Like I said, it really is quite complex at times. For instance, older gamers will see something like a large pool of water and probably instantly know that there's got to be a tunnel under there or at least some health or ammo tucked away. Whereas younger gamers aren't used to that kind of level design and will probably be a little bit stumped. Like I said earlier, it usually comes down to a switch that you have to flip to move on, but usually there's always in the nearby vicinity, so it ain't all that bad. Some people might find the combat a little bit crushing as well, just because the enemy AI can be absolutely ruthless. If you're not used to circle strafing and keeping your crosshair fixed on an enemy, along with being totally aware of your surroundings, you're going to have a bad time. But really there is very little to complain about with Unreal, and the fact that you also get a multiplayer mode thrown in as well makes it even more good value. Ultimately, I would suggest this game to anyone fond of old school shooters, and also to people who don't know what that is, as something of a rite of passage. Finishing Unreal is definitely an honourable notch on any gamer's belt, and after playing it, I'm sure anyone would agree that it's worth all the praise it has received. At the moment, I'd suggest getting the version from goodoldgames.com as well.